The heavy iron drop bolt screeched against its blackened bracket as the seventh latch slammed home, sealing 4 inches of solid oak between Jiddu Prasad and the midnight howling outside. He stood alone in the amber glow of a single tallow lamp, exhaling a thin plume of vapor into the freezing mountain air, his fingers caressing the cold metal as if it were the hand of an old, reliable friend. Outside, the winter gale tore through the cliffside pines, but inside the stone dispensary, nothing moved except the steady curl of steam rising from a clay decoction bowl. Jiddu lifted the boiling brew to his cracked lips, blowing across the dark surface to clear his chest before the heavy frost set in. The first swallow tasted of scorched earth and wild mountain honey. The second burned like liquid fire sliding down his windpipe. His throat constricted into a tight, suffocating fist as the earthenware bowl slipped from his numb fingers and shattered across the stone floor. He had mistaken the roots. In the dim twilight, his clouded right eye had reached for the wild purple aconite instead of the soothing mountain ginseng. The paralysis was already creeping through his veins, turning his blood into freezing lead. The only antidote, fresh silver honeysuckle root, was not in his cedar chest. It was in the woven wicker pack of the young apprentice he had cursed and cast out into the blizzard 2 hours before, and 7 heavy iron bolts stood locked between his dying body and the world outside. For 30 winters, Jiddu Prasad had lived as a man under siege. His cliffside dispensary hung over the mist ravine like a solitary hawk's nest, sheltered beneath an overhanging granite cliff where only the mountain wind dared to knock. He had not always barred his gates against the world. Decades ago, when his young wife Amara was still alive, the wooden doors stood open to every coughing traveler who passed the high trail. She would sit beside the iron hearth, grinding dried lotus petals in a gray sandstone mortar, smiling softly at his endless botanical sketches. "Medicine heals the flesh, Jiddu," she would whisper, her gentle hand resting over his calloused knuckles. "But only an open door heals the spirit." Then came the winter of betrayal. His sworn brother and fellow apothecary had stolen his ancestral formula for lung fever, selling the secret to a wealthy merchant guild in the capital, while leaving Amara to perish without remedy during the great mountain pestilence. From that bitter night, grief hardened into stone. Jiddu forged 7 heavy iron drop bolts with his own hammer, mounting them one by one across the double oak doors. He convinced himself that every smile concealed a dagger, that every knock upon his threshold was the approach of a thief. When the orphaned youth Haru Tan arrived 2 winters ago, begging to gather roots in exchange for dry straw and broth, Jiddu took him in only out of necessity, yet he kept the boy at arm's length, trusting no one beneath his roof. The morning before the storm broke, a caravan mule train had halted at the stone steps below the ravine. Out from the heavy woolen litter stepped Surin Murthy, the chief agent of the Capital Medicine Guild. He climbed the frosted path, wrapped in a beaver-lined cloak, 2 armed guards following behind, with heavy iron-banded coffers. Surin did not wait for an invitation. He stepped past the threshold, his keen eyes scanning the ceiling rafters where hundreds of bundled roots hung drying in the cedar smoke. "Master Prasad," Surin began, resting his plump hands upon his silver-buckled belt, a knowing smirk playing at his lips. 30 years in this freezing cave is enough penance for any man. The guild offers 300 silver ingots for your refined frostroot decoction. Name your price, and you may spend your remaining winters in a heated villa by the southern lakes. Jiddu did not lift his gaze from the cutting board. His knife sliced through dried angelica root, with rhythmic, ruthless precision. "My medicine belongs to the sick who climb this mountain," Jiddu replied, his voice dry as winter straw. "It is not for sale to merchants who dilute life for profit. Take your guards and leave my mountain." Surin chuckled, though his eyes narrowed into cold slits. "You pride yourself on purity, old man, but you are blind as a cave mole. You lock your doors against the guild, yet you harbor a stray rat beneath your own rafters. Surin leaned closer, tapping his jade ring against the counter. The orphan boy you took in, Haru. He met my scouts at the lower crossing yesterday. He offered to sell your formula for 50 copper coins. A peasant boy's price for a master's life work. The words struck Jiddu like an iron needle through the temple. His knife stopped mid-slice. His clouded right eye twitched, the old poison of suspicion flaring instantly into an all-consuming flame. Think on it, Master Prasad, Surin whispered, turning toward the door with an oily bow. A locked fortress is worthless when the thief sleeps in your pantry. When the caravan departed down the mountain pass, silence settled over the dispensary, suffocating and sharp. Jiddu stood motionless by the window, watching the gray clouds swallow the southern peaks. Every memory of the past 2 years twisted in his mind. Haru waking before dawn to inspect the drying racks. Haru asking gentle questions about the ratio of aconite to honeysuckle. Haru carrying his woven wicker basket into the upper valley without permission. He was measuring my measures, Jiddu muttered, his fingernails digging into his palms. He was waiting for the winter snow to bury me. At dusk, the wooden latch clicked. Haru stepped through the door, shivering in his patched indigo tunic, his straw sandals caked with wet snow. Snowflakes melted in his disheveled hair as he carefully set down his wicker pack by the hearth. "Master," the boy said softly, his voice trembling from the biting wind. "The frost is coming early tonight. I climbed the north cliff to gather the wild honeysuckle before the ice freezes the ravines. The roots are fresh. They will protect our lungs through the dark months." Jiddu turned, his face pale and contorted with fury. He did not look at the fresh green stems spilling from the basket. He saw only the ghost of his sworn brother, the stolen ledger, and the bitter loneliness of 30 years. "Liar!" Jiddu roared, stepping forward and striking the boy across the face with his open hand. "You met the guild scouts at the river. You came into my home to steal what was never yours, counting on my blindness to rob my wife's memory." Haru stumbled backward, his hand flying to his reddened cheek, his wide brown eyes filled with sheer disbelief. "Master, I know nothing of the guild. I swear upon the mountain spirits, I have never spoken to a merchant." "Out!" Jiddu pointed his trembling finger toward the howling tempest outside. "Take your thieving hands and your wicker pack off my cliff. If you return to this threshold, I will set the mastiffs upon you." Haru stood frozen for 3 heartbeats, tears freezing on his cheeks. He bowed deeply, touching his forehead to the icy flagstone, then hoisted his heavy pack and walked out into the swirling white blizzard, without another word. As soon as the boy's shadow vanished into the drift, Jiddu slammed the heavy oak door shut. One by one, with trembling, venomous triumph, he drove home all 7 iron drop bolts. He turned the final latch, blew out the hearth fire, and congratulated himself on outsmarting another traitor. 2 hours later, the silence of the dispensary turned into a tomb. Jiddu lay sprawled across the stone floor, his chest heaving like a dying fish. The aconite poison had moved with terrifying speed. His lower limbs were completely dead, cold as mountain river stones. The icy numbness was climbing up his spine, freezing his diaphragm, turning every breath into a knife thrust of agony. Water he choked, his lips turning a dark plum purple. Must neutralize. Dragging his body with his elbows, clawing into the stone grooves with bleeding fingernails, he pulled himself inch by inch toward the apothecary counter. Above him, on the 3rd shelf, sat the glass jars of charcoal powder and licorice root. He reached out with his left hand, his good hand, straining his shoulder muscles until the tendon threatened to snap. His fingertips brushed the edge of the shelf. The heavy stone jar wobbled, tipped, and crashed down onto the floor beside his ear, shattering into 50 sharp shards, the black charcoal dust scattering uselessly into the cracks between the stones. A sob broke from Jiddu's chest. He had no strength to crush raw licorice. The aconite demanded the fresh sap of wild silver honeysuckle. a living root with active enzymes to bind the venom before his heart stopped beating. And every single stalk of fresh honeysuckle had walked out into the storm on the back of the boy he had struck. Outside, the wind screamed against the stone eaves like a choir of vengeful spirits. The temperature inside was plummeting. Jiddu turned his head toward the entrance. There stood the heavy oak door, illuminated by the dying tallow lamp. Across its broad width gleamed the 7 forged iron drop bolts, heavy and uncompromising, seated firmly in their deep iron brackets. He had built them to keep the world out. He had oiled their tracks so they would never budge under battering rams or crowbars. Now he was the prisoner. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, Jiddu dragged his paralyzed torso across the freezing stones toward the door. Each inch cost him a mouthful of bloody foam. He reached the bottom of the door, his forehead pressing against the rough oak grain. He stretched his arm upward. The lowest bolt sat at waist height, 2 feet above his reach. He clawed at the iron strapping, trying to hoist his dead weight, but his fingers slipped in his own sweat and blood. He crashed back down onto the flagstones. He tried again, his knuckles tearing against the rough iron edges. He could not even touch the first bolt. The second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and 7th bolts remained locked in high, mocking alignment. "I am dying in my own cage," he whispered into the frozen wood, tears washing clean channels through the dust on his cheeks. "I built the walls. I forged the iron. I drove away the only soul who cared if I lived." His vision narrowed into a dark tunnel. The sound of the wind faded into a distant roar. His fingers uncurled, lying flat and motionless upon the icy stone floor, awaiting the final frost. Through the dark veil of unconsciousness, a strange sound penetrated the room. It was not the wind. It was the sharp, rhythmic strike of iron against stone on the exterior doorframe. Thud, crack, screech. The heavy outside iron pivot groaned under immense leverage. A blast of freezing white snow burst into the room as the outer wooden retaining frame fractured. The double doors did not swing open. The 7 bolts still held the center tight, but a wide gap opened at the left jamb where the iron hinges had been pried from the rock wall with a pickaxe. A slender figure squeezed through the jagged opening, tumbling into the snowdrift on the floor. It was Haru. His coat was torn, his hands raw and bleeding from the frozen tools, his face blue with frostbite. He took one look at Jiddu's purple lips and collapsed beside him. "Master, hold on. Do not close your eyes." Haru did not ask for apologies. He did not look at the heavy bolts that had condemned him to the blizzard. Working with fierce precision, the boy pulled fresh silver honeysuckle roots from his snow-caked basket. He laid them inside Amara's old sandstone mortar, crushing them with the boxwood pestle until the fragrant green juice pooled in the bowl. Lifting Jiddu's head onto his lap, Haru pressed the rim of the stone mortar to the old man's lips, trickling the bitter green nectar into his throat. For 3 long minutes, only the wind howled. Then, a violent cough racked Jiddu's chest. Black bile spilled onto the stone floor as his lungs seized oxygen, his heart stuttering back into a steady, warm rhythm. Dawn broke across the mist ravine in long ribbons of rose and gold. The storm had passed, leaving the ancient pines draped in pristine white crystal, sparkling under a quiet, benevolent sky. Inside the apothecary, the iron hearth burned with aromatic cedar logs, sending waves of fragrant heat into every corner. Jiddu sat upon the wooden bench, his color restored, his trembling hands wrapped around a steaming bowl of ginger broth. Across from him, Haru slept peacefully on a pallet of clean straw, his bandaged hands resting over his chest. On the stone work table beside the door lay 7 heavy iron drop bolts, unmounted and cold, their brackets removed forever. They were no longer locks. Jiddu had laid them side by side as fire iron supports to hold the heavy kettle above the glowing embers. The heavy oak doors stood propped wide open to the mountain air, welcoming the morning light and the chirping of snow buntings in the eaves. A barred gate protects nothing from the fear that built it.